Torah Life Ministries come out of the world. Messiah people seek the truth.
Hello everybody, it's Paul Neeson with Torah Life Ministries. We're really excited here. We're up to the 10th reading in this week's Torah Portia. Now if you don't know what the Torah Portias are, it's the instructions and the guideline of our Creator. And 10 weeks ago we started at the beginning of Genesis in Genesis 1:1, and we're going all the way through the first 5 books of the Bible, and we're up to the 10th reading. This is the 10th week we're doing it, and we're up to Genesis 41:1 to 44:17. Now, if you missed any of the teachings from the past, you can see them on healthwatchman.com. But last week we ended off with Joseph being thrown into a jail because he was falsely accused of doing something he didn't do. He was being seduced by the owner's wife, but he didn't do anything wrong. But in jail, he met the chief cupbearer and also the chief baker of the king, the Pharaoh of Egypt at that time. And they had a dream, each of them, and Joseph correctly interpreted it, and they came true. And Joseph said, all I ask you to do is remember me when you're in front of the king. Remember, I'm here innocently in jail, and I'd like to get out. Well, that was Joseph's idea, but a wonderful Creator had different plans and decided to keep Joseph in there 2 more years. Actually, it wasn't until the chief cupbearer, who didn't remember or even say anything about Joseph back then to the king, he was restored to his former position, and he went on long for 2 years and didn't say anything. But we see this reading here, it starts off, it says, at the end of 2 years. At the end of 2 years. So now we see Joseph being in the dungeon for at least 2 years. And it says the Pharaoh, the king of Egypt, had a dream. And I don't really want to talk about the exact dream he actually had. I want to focus on more of that no one else in the land could interpret the dream. No one else knew what it was. All the magicians, all the people that said they knew, all the spiritual people, everyone the king had in his court, no one could identify or interpret the dream, so the king was getting very mad. But that's when the cupbearer said, okay, now I remember there was this fellow, this Jewish fellow who was in the jail cell who interpreted the dreams correctly, and I will tell the king this. So he told this to the king. So the king, what he does is he brings him out, he summons Joseph, and they brought him quickly out of him. They got him right away, so you know the king was very anxious to find out what exactly this dream meant, and no one else could interpret it. And then he says to Joseph, he says, I know you can translate dreams. What does this dream mean? And Joseph does something pretty amazing. And he was an amazing character. He says, it is not me that has the power or the control to translate these dreams. This is a gift that a wonderful Creator has given me to tell you what He is saying. As it says here, it says in Genesis 41:16 that Joseph answered Pharaoh, it isn't me. Yahweh will give Pharaoh an answer that will set his mind at peace. So Joseph was just a mouthpiece, so to say, or the messenger. But it wasn't Joseph translating the dream. It was a wonderful Creator saying, okay, now it is time to reveal this dream to Pharaoh and to put my plan into place. But, you know, Joseph was important and careful not to take the credit for himself, knowing it was not him. He even said when he explained the dream, he says here in Genesis 44:25, he says, Yahweh has told Pharaoh. Yahweh has told Pharaoh. So again, he says, this is the dream and this is what was told to him. And then it goes on, you know, the Pharaoh was very impressed with Joseph's ability not only to interpret this dream, but also to understand, I'm sure, how humble Joseph was, not to take all the credit for himself. And I'm sure a lot of the people in Egypt at the time that would have even came close to pleasing the king would have really went out of the way to taking credit for this, to try to get in better standing. But that's not what Joseph said. But now the Pharaoh said, well, now what can I do about this? And Joseph said, you know, put both a discreet and wise person in charge, so, you know, and give him the plan. And the Pharaoh thought about it and said, well, nobody else better than the person that interpreted the dream. So he placed him in charge of all of Egypt. He was second in charge. So you have a Jewish person second in charge of all of Egypt. Now, I don't understand. I mean, I don't know if you understand the significance of that, everybody. That's like, you know, those American hostages that were held in Iran and recently in a jail. And that's like the the dictatorship of Iran, or the president of Iran pulling one of those Americans out of jail in Iran and saying, you know, I had a dream last night. Can you interpret this? One of the Americans interpret the dream, and that's like saying that Iranian president says, you know what? None of my people are able to interpret this, so I'm going to put you in charge of all of the people of Iran. You're second in charge next to me, and whatever you say goes. That's amazing. And so Joseph was in charge of all of Israel. I mean, just astonishing. I mean, that he would get that point. It's just like when Paul went into Rome. He wanted to go to Rome, but we don't understand. Rome wasn't some vacation destination like it is today. You know, what Paul did by going into Rome to bring the good news was like you or I going into the middle of a street in Iraq and proclaiming the good news. I mean, this was a hostile environment that didn't want to hear anything about the scriptures or Messiah or anything else. Well, some people do, but for the most part, these are significant things, but just because of the logistics today, we don't see them as they were. So Joseph becomes in charge of all of land in Egypt, and this is when he was 30 years old. So he was 30 years old. So he had 30 years to get right now. Next it says, not only was he put in second charge of all of Egypt, but it says here, they changed his name, and I'm sure they changed his appearance because they shaved him and they changed his appearance. So they changed his name and appearance. Well, that's going to be important for later on in this week's story. But they also gave him a wife. They gave him an Egyptian wife. And he had two kids. He had two kids. One of them was Manasseh, and one of them was Ephraim. And so he had two kids, Manasseh and Ephraim. And again, a big significance in that coming up as well in a future reading. But we see here what happened. Joseph's dream, his interpretation of the dream, came true. And look at Yahweh's wonderful plan when he said, you know, he had Pharaoh change Joseph's name and appearance. So now when the brothers of Joseph came to visit him, Joseph knew who they were, because how could he forget what they've done to him? But they didn't know who he was. Why? Because it was our Creator's plan to disguise Joseph with a different name, a different situation, a different look, a different everything, even an Egyptian wife. I mean, even if the brothers recognized him, they would say, how in the world would he have an Egyptian wife? But so all of that happened. So they didn't recognize him, and they were scared for their lives. So what did they do? They, just like the dream that Joseph had that he immaturely couldn't interpret way back when he first had it. But now he was able to see the interpretation many years later. His brothers prostrated themselves before him to the ground. That was the dream he had, with their bags of wheat bowing down to Joseph's bag of wheat at the beginning. That got the brothers so mad that put him into the situation to begin with. So we see Joseph's dream. Finally, after all these years, he's figured out what the true interpretation was back then. And I'm sure Joseph knew he had a gift of interpreting dreams, but his real gift was something he didn't have in his immaturity as a young man that he had now. And that was something we all need as believers. And that was patience. Because we see the patience that Joseph had. I mean, he was in a jail. He really couldn't do much. But he was able to act in a way where he was able to interpret other dreams and still maintain his composure. And he gets in front of the king, and he's just patient and waiting because he knows his time will come. Now, I'm sure if he's interpreting other dreams, I'm sure he had dreams himself that he was interpreting, and our wonderful Creator was speaking to him. Well, did he know what was going to happen or not happen? I don't know, but he did know that it's not his plan, it's our Creator's plan, and he stuck to it. And his amazing patience that didn't just come and run to his father and his brothers and say, look, I'm alive. No. He put this plan, he sent them back twice before they came back with his father. And absolutely an amazing story. And we see the amazing blessings that continue to take place for Joseph. And then the blessing over his two children that Yaakov gave them, and the significance of that coming up in a future reading. But, you know, I'm so impressed with the story of Joseph and really his patience and his maturity. And as believers, when we first become believers, we can easily handle things the wrong way. We could be very impatient with things. And definitely we could be thrown into situations that we were wrongly accused of doing certain things. But we have to understand the favor and the blessings of our wonderful Creator, if they're on us. It will all turn out. according to His plan. And if our will is happy and finds joy in His will, there goes our stress, our worry, and our fear. Knowing that He has a plan for us should be reason enough not to worry or not to show any fear. You know, we need to have faith and more faith. And I do believe what set Joseph apart from his brothers and many other people was he had such amazing faith that there was a Creator. Just like he said last week, how can I sin against my Creator? It wasn't about this earthly realm of what was happening or what was going on. He always focused and looked at, well, what is my Creator thinking right now? Am I pleasing Him? Am I showing Him glory? Or am I dishonoring Him? And that's the way we need to think in every situation. Now, I'm not saying it's wrong or bad to have worry or fear. Sometimes that adrenaline will help us. But we need to take more faith in Him. And we need to understand that most of the things we have worry and fear about in today's world, and impatience. If we really step back to think about what we were worried and what we feared, not only does it show our lack of faith in Him, but it also shows that we're still in our human frame of thinking. And yes, we all have worry and fear. I'm no different than you out there, but we need to take examples from the people in the scriptures that have been blessed tremendously. And Joseph is a great example of his faith and his actions and the consequences that come along with being obedient. So if you have any questions or comments about this week's reading, post them below the videos. We have many other Torah videos coming up. We're really excited at Torah Life Ministries. Thank you for joining us for this week, the 10th week in this year's cycle. Until then, everybody, have a great Shabbat next week, and Shalom, Shalom.
Torah Life Ministries come out of the world. Messiah people seek the truth.